Joining me now from San Francisco is one of Mexico's leading investigative journalists, Anabel Hernandez. She was forced to flee Mexico due to death threats after writing extensively about the Mexican drug cartels. She's the author of Narcoland. Also joining me from California is Mexican political science professor Vidal Romero. His focus is drug-related crime, and he's a visiting professor at Stanford University. Welcome to the both of you to the show. Anabel, what did you make of the escape of El Chapo Guzman? Did it come to you as a surprise?
Well, not really. Not really. When El Chapo was arrested on February of 2014, I keep my eye on him. I have been investigating this guy and the Sinaloa cartel for more than 10 years. So I really understand that this guy and this cartel has a lot of power, and they have many connections inside the government in the high levels. So I really noticed very fast that El Chapo Guzman started to control the jail, control el Altiplano, almost since he arrived.
Vidal, there have been reports, and as we've just had Anabel tell us as well, that Guzman must have had support at a very high level, help at a very high level to be able to escape from prison. So what does this tell us about the level of control that the state has over its own security forces?
Yeah, it's terrible news. Very likely, as you well said, as Anabel said, he was held by someone from the inside, the high level of government, and that just shows how far reaches the corruption in the Mexican government. And this is very bad news, not only for the security, for the war on drugs, but also for the economy, because investors are not going to go to Mexico. So it's really bad news in all senses.
And well, what are the chances that Guzman's escape will set off even more violence among competing cartels in Mexico's drug war?
Well, first, the society, the people really have to understand that nothing changed when El Chapo Guzman was arrested. Because when he was in jail, even there, he was still managing the business in the Sinaloa cartel. His position still be there. He was able to have meetings with his lawyer every day for 2 or 3 hours per day. So in that meetings, he was able to give orders to the cartels. So nothing changed when he was arrested, and I really believe that nothing changed now. He is in the streets, because the less people, the less person that wants violence is him, because any point in Mexico or other countries that explode the violence, everyone will know that he is there. He doesn't have to fight, because everything is under control.
Vidal, Anabel raises a great point there, and that is the so-called Mexican strategy known as the kingpin strategy, targeting the heads of cartels.
Right.
But by targeting the heads of cartels, people like Guzman, has it really done anything to quell violence, on the street level?
No, it has not. And actually, all the research that is on that topic shows that when you capture a kingpin and you don't do other kind of actions against the rest of the cartel in their finances and lower levels, actually violence escalates. So you're going to watch even more deaths when you focus your strategy on that. And this we know from many other cases in the world, and even with civil wars, and in Italy and Colombia. So there is knowledge that this is not a good strategy. And I just want to comment on Anabel's point that nothing is going to change. I think things are going to get worse, because perhaps in terms of the Sinaloa cartel, as Anabel will say, nothing is going to change. But the signal to the rest of the cartels is that the government is really weak, and it's also that that you can buy high-level officials in the Mexican government. So I think this will increase pressure from other cartels, and I think we're going to watch even more violence.
Anabel?
Yeah, I want to give an example of what the professor explained. For example, I was requesting to the federal government, to the Mexican federal government, about the list of all the people that was arrested after El Chapo involved in all these, wire of connections inside the government, and the government said no one. I mean, no one was arrested. Any member of the army, any member of the federal police, any member of the Attorney General office, no one was arrested after El Chapo was arrested. So this wire of the Sinaloa cartel is still there. Another request that I make to the federal government is, please, government, tell me how many companies did you confiscate to the Sinaloa cartel when you arrest to El Chapo Guzman? And tell me, please, how many money did you confiscate? And the federal government said, any. So no one. I mean, the government never confiscate any company or the money of the cartel. So that's why it was very easy to this man, to El Chapo Guzman, escape from jail. Because he has all the connections, all the money is still being there.
Vidal, this goes to the question of government accountability. I mean, has there been accountability? And where does Mexican public opinion fall on this? I mean, there's been some reports where they say there has not been enough outrage in Mexico over what is going on.
Yeah, I think there's enough outrage, but I think it's badly focused. I think the government, we have this ancient problem of corruption, and we have given some steps forwards and some steps backwards. But the government is very much doing things as business as usual. But also from the society is also doing business as usual. I mean, we haven't been able as a society in Mexico to find new ways to put enough pressure on the government. I mean, the most we observe are street protests, which are really massive, and people get mad at the government, that they protest, but that doesn't really work. This is like 1980s strategies. This is not going to lead us anywhere. So from society, we still have to work a lot also. It is not only it is the government's problem, but we are not doing enough from society as well.
Anabel, do you see any evidence from the government that they have a strategy, a long-term strategy, to deal with this crisis, to deal with these gangs?
Well, no. Of course, for me, it's not clear that the Mexican government has some strategy about it. But I have to tell something else. The corruption is not just inside Mexico. And Mexico is not just the only country that doesn't have any strategy about it. Of course, what is happening in the U.S. is very important and has a lot of impact of what is happening in Mexico. If you have huge white elephants, tons of cocaine, tons of methamphetamines that cross the border between Mexico and U.S. every day, and no one sees these elephants, it's because also here in U.S. exists corruption. And if as you know, exist the proofs in several criminal cases in federal courts here in U.S. that the cartels used to launder their money in banks of U.S. Exist a lot of names of these banks. Exist huge cases in courts that shows that the U.S. banks or banks from England also launder the money of these cartels. So the corruption is not just in Mexico. I understand that the corruption in Mexico provoked that this cartel is the most important cartel in Mexico. But which is the level of the corruption that makes that this cartel is not just the most powerful cartel in Mexico, it's almost the most powerful cartel in the world. So the corruption is everywhere. And that's the point. I mean, I think really that this money, this dirty money from the drugs, illegal drugs, is moving the economy in many ways, not just in Mexico, also in the world. So I think in this problem, we have to watch it in a big view.
Right, Professor, and we've also heard criticism that, the United States is ultimately responsible for what is going on in Mexico because this is the country where there is that very big, huge, lucrative market for the drugs that are produced.
Yeah, that's correct. But also, I think that calls for new strategies and new ways of thinking the problem. And for instance, Mexico and many countries in Latin America has a comparative advantage in, for instance, in cultivating drugs. So let's think about legalizing drugs, for instance, and let's separate the business part from all the negative externalities that it causes. I mean, the U.S., Anabel is right. I mean, there should be a lot of corruption in the U.S. related to drug trafficking, but the U.S. has managed to separate all this criminal activity from society in a very efficient way. Gangs and drug cartels in the U.S. are not killing themselves in the streets, for instance, whereas in Mexico they are doing that. So we're not going to end drug trafficking. I mean, it's ingenious to think that way. But what we can do is to minimize the negative externalities to society. And that means we got to start thinking in things like legalizing drugs, for instance. And actually, it's a very lucrative business, as we all know. So why not take advantage of that business that faces a very inelastic demand in the U.S. and in many other countries, and we're not going to end it. So let's profit from it.
Vidal, one other thing, and that is how these gangs operate, how these drug gangs operate. Are they focused totally on drugs, or have they branched out into other illegal activities? Have they sort of diversified their business, if I could put it that way?
Yeah, I think this is one of the core issues in Mexico now, that these cartels have diversified their activities. So now they kidnap, they extort business, so they are threatening societally in a very direct way, and also economic activity. So that's why right now this is a humongous problem. It's out of the hands of the government, and also the Chapo escape also shows not only the corruption but also the incapacity of the government. I mean, even if let's assume for a moment that Peña Nieto and the Ministry of Government are not corrupt. Let's assume that. Even if they want to really capture the Chapo, I don't think they would be able to do it. I mean, it's both things. So it makes the thing really, really scary in terms of state capacity.
Vidal Romero, Anabel Hernandez, thanks to both of you for joining us. When we come back, we will hear from a former Mexican ambassador to the United States. What does he think of the Mexican government's response to his country's war on drugs? Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.